The crisp white envelope felt heavy in Mike's hand, a stark contrast to the lightness of the celebratory mood swirling around him. His wife, Carol, hummed a cheerful tune as she flitted around their spacious kitchen, arranging a vibrant array of flowers for their upcoming anniversary trip to Tuscany. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, a comforting scent that usually calmed his anxieties. But today, the scent did nothing to quell the rising tide of dread churning within him. He knew what was inside the envelope, the results of the DNA test. Sarah, a name that felt both foreign and intimately familiar, had sent him. He'd avoided opening it for days, clinging to the illusion of normalcy, the comfortable rhythm of his life with Carol, his 2 children, a life carefully constructed on a foundation of lies. He sat down at the kitchen island, the sunlight catching the polished granite, a stark reminder of the opulent life he'd built. He watched Carol, her back to him, the lines of worry usually etched around her eyes temporarily softened by the excitement of their upcoming getaway. He felt a stab of guilt, a visceral pain that tightened his chest. He loved her fiercely. She was his anchor, his rock, the woman who had given him everything he thought he ever wanted. And now he was about to shatter that carefully crafted world. The silence in the room became oppressive, the cheerful humming replaced by a persistent pounding in his ears. He picked up the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly, and with a deep breath, tore it open. The stark, clinical language of the report blurred through his tears. The confirmation stared back at him, cold and undeniable. Sarah was his daughter. 18 years. 18 years he had lived a lie. 18 years of a carefully constructed reality built on a foundation of deceit. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. He sank into the chair, the weight of the truth crushing him. The cheerful image of Carol preparing for their trip dissolved, replaced by a kaleidoscope of guilt and fear. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, threatening to engulf him in a maelstrom of his own making. He reread the report, each word a hammer blow to his already fragile composure. The percentage of probability, the scientific certainty, it was all there, stark and unforgiving. The relief, a flicker of it, was fleeting, replaced instantly by a crushing weight of responsibility. The thought of facing Carol, of explaining this monumental secret, this devastating truth, paralyzed him with fear. The image of their faces, the happiness etched on their features a few moments before, felt like a distant memory, a dream from a life that no longer existed. He thought of Sarah. He had only ever seen a single picture, a girl with her mother's eyes, yet with an uncanny resemblance to him, a resemblance he dismissed, buried deep beneath years of guilt and denial. What kind of life had she lived, deprived of a father's love, a father's presence? The question burrowed into his conscience, a relentless worm of self-recrimination. He hadn't been a good man, not in this. He had allowed fear to dictate his actions. Fear of losing Carol, fear of the upheaval his confession would cause. He had prioritized his own comfort, his own carefully constructed happiness, above the needs of his daughter. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. He got up, pacing the kitchen floor, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thud of his feet against the hardwood. Carol turned, her smile faltering as she noticed his distress. "Mike, honey, are you all right? You look pale." He could barely meet her eyes, the words caught in his throat. How could he possibly tell her? How could he break the news that would shatter their world, the world he'd so painstakingly built? He tried to conjure the words, tried to craft a sentence, a phrase that could begin to explain the truth, but they remained trapped in his chest, a suffocating weight. He mumbled something incoherent, a pitiful excuse about feeling unwell, a lie that felt as heavy as the truth he was desperately trying to conceal. Carol's concern was palpable, her usual bright demeanor clouded with worry. She placed a comforting hand on his arm, her touch a stark reminder of the life he stood to lose. He closed his eyes, the image of Sarah's face from the single photograph he'd seen imprinted on his eyelids. He saw the longing in her eyes, the unspoken questions that mirrored his own guilt and confusion. He felt a surge of longing, a desperate need to rectify the past, to repair the damage he had inflicted. But how? His anniversary trip, the meticulously planned vacation to the rolling hills of Tuscany, felt like a cruel joke now, a mockery of his happiness. The thought of escaping, of delaying the inevitable, was tempting. But the thought of postponing this reckoning only deepened his guilt, intensified his feelings of betrayal. He knew he couldn't run from this, couldn't hide from the truth any longer. He had to face it head on. He had to face Carol, face Sarah, and face the consequences of his 18-year-old silence. He had to unravel the tangled web of lies he had spun, even if it meant tearing apart the life he had so carefully crafted. The future stretched before him, uncertain and daunting, but the weight on his chest lessened slightly, replaced by a flicker of something akin to resolve. He knew the road ahead would be arduous, a path paved with difficult conversations and emotional turmoil, but he knew too that he had to take it. The DNA test results were merely the starting point of a much longer journey, a journey of reconciliation, of truth, and of facing the consequences of his actions. The taste of bitter regret was strong, but so was a sense of dawning acceptance and perhaps even a shred of hope. The salt spray kissed Sarah's face as she perched on the weathered rocks overlooking the churning grey sea. The wind, a constant companion in her small coastal town, whipped her dark hair across her cheeks, a familiar caress. 18 years she'd lived this life, a life of quiet simplicity, punctuated by the rhythm of the tides and the comforting presence of her mother, a woman whose strength and love had been her anchor. Their small cottage, nestled amongst a cluster of similar dwellings, was a haven of warmth and affection, a stark contrast to the life she now suspected existed elsewhere, a life she was determined to uncover. The DNA test results, delivered in a plain, unmarked envelope, had landed like a pebble dropped into a still pond. The ripples, at first subtle, had quickly spread, transforming the calm surface of her existence. The revelation that she had an unknown paternal relative, Mike's brother, according to the cryptic details on the report, had shattered her comfortable world. Until now, her life had been a canvas painted with familiar colours. The comforting scent of her mother's baking, the sound of her mother's humming as she mended clothes, the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore. Now, a vibrant, unsettling new hue had been introduced, a splash of colour she couldn't quite decipher, but felt instinctively compelled to understand. Her mother, a woman of quiet resilience, had always been guarded about her past. Questions about her father were met with gentle deflections, a smile that masked a hint of sadness, and the repeated refrain, "Some things are best left unspoken, sweetheart." Sarah, having grown accustomed to her mother's careful silences, had rarely pressed the issue. But the DNA test results had changed everything. It was no longer a question of curiosity, it was a need, a deep-seated yearning to fill a void she had only recently become aware of. The absence of the father hadn't been a gaping wound, more a subtle emptiness, a faint echo in the silence. Now, that echo had become a deafening roar, demanding to be heard, demanding answers. She pulled out the crumpled report from her pocket, its edges softened from repeated handling. The sterile language of scientific probability felt alien yet strangely compelling. The percentage, the undeniable certainty of a genetic link confirmed what a part of her had always suspected. That there was more to her story, more to her identity than she'd been allowed to know. The report had mentioned a Mike, a name that felt foreign yet strangely familiar, a name that resonated with a hidden chord within her soul. The name, coupled with the link to Mike's brother, sparked a fierce determination within her. She wouldn't let this mystery remain unsolved. Her life in the coastal town had been simple, a tapestry woven with the threads of everyday life. She worked part-time at the local cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee a constant companion. Her days were filled with the familiar routine, a rhythm she'd grown to cherish. She spent her evenings studying, her ambition to become a marine biologist a beacon guiding her through the quiet solitude of her nights. But this new revelation, this unexpected connection to a family she never knew existed, had shaken the foundation of her carefully constructed world. It had ignited a fire, a yearning to understand her heritage, to unravel the mystery surrounding her father's identity, and to possibly, just possibly, meet the man who was half of her genetic makeup. She pictured her mother, her face etched with the years, her eyes reflecting a life lived with quiet dignity and unwavering strength. Her mother's life, Sarah realized, had been a testament to resilience, a quiet defiance in the face of adversity. She'd never burdened Sarah with the specifics of the past, and the realization that this secret was significant resonated deeply. The weight of her mother's silence, the unspoken pain, now felt heavier than ever. She had always admired her mother's strength, her ability to navigate life's challenges with grace and determination. But now, Sarah felt a surge of protective anger at the years her mother had hidden the truth. It was a betrayal, not of malicious intent, she suspected, but a betrayal nonetheless. A betrayal fueled by pain and the burden of her own secrets. The thought of confronting her mother about the truth filled her with a mix of apprehension and determination. The conversation was inevitable, a necessary step in her journey of self-discovery. But Sarah knew she had to tread carefully, understanding her mother's reasons, her justifications, before passing any judgment. She had a lifetime of silence to unravel, a lifetime of unspoken words and suppressed emotions to navigate. Understanding her mother's perspective was paramount, not just for her own peace of mind, but for the possibility of heaving the cracks that had been created in their already tight-knit relationship. The sea, once a source of solace, now mirrored the turbulent emotions swirling within her. The relentless crashing of waves against the shore served as a constant reminder of the unyielding power of the ocean's depths, much like the secrets buried beneath the surface of her family history. This journey, she realized, would be arduous, a complex exploration of familial secrets, unexpected connections, and the enduring power of the human heart. It was a journey that would test her resilience, challenge her perceptions, and ultimately shape her understanding of herself and the family she was only now beginning to know. It would be difficult, but it was a journey she was determined to take. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the contact information she'd found online. It was time to begin her search for her father. The first step felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Her search was not simply a quest for information, it was a journey towards self-discovery, a quest to understand her own identity and to find her place in a family she never knew existed. She didn't know what to expect, didn't know what kind of welcome awaited her, but a sense of steely determination resonated deep within her core. The unknown stretched before her, vast and unpredictable, but she was ready to face it, to dive headfirst into the swirling currents of her past, and emerge, hopefully, into a clearer, more complete understanding of her present. The wind picked up and the sea roared, a symphony of nature's power echoing the turmoil and excitement raging inside her. This was only the beginning. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung heavy in the air, a comforting blanket against the nervous energy thrumming between them. Sarah sat across from Mike, the small round table between them a stark visual representation of the vast emotional distance that separated them. She'd chosen this quiet coffee shop, a neutral ground, hoping the familiar comfort of caffeine might ease the tension, but the atmosphere felt thick with unspoken words, with years of silence and regret. Mike shifted in his chair, the worn leather creaking a soft counterpoint to the rhythmic clatter of spoons against ceramic mugs. He'd expected this meeting to be easier. He'd rehearsed the conversation countless times in his head, constructing perfect sentences, crafting the ideal tone, but the carefully constructed words evaporated the moment he saw her. Sarah was strikingly familiar, a younger version of someone he vaguely remembered a ghost from a past he'd spent years trying to bury. Her eyes, the same deep brown as his own, held a mixture of apprehension and quiet determination that mirrored his own inner turmoil. The silence stretched, a tangible entity hanging between them, broken only by the low murmur of other patrons and the gentle clinking of cups. Sarah, ever practical, was the first to break the ice. "So," she began, her voice a little shaky, "the DNA tested was quite conclusive, wasn't it?" The question hung in the air, a delicate butterfly poised before a storm. Mike cleared his throat, the sound oddly loud in the quiet cafe. Yes, he finally managed, his voice rough around the edges. It was. He reached for his coffee, the warmth of the mug a small comfort in the chill of the unexpected encounter. He took a long sip, the bitter taste a stark contrast to the sweetness he had envisioned this moment might hold. I didn't know what to expect, Sarah continued, her gaze drifting to the swirling pattern in her latte. I mean, 18 years, it's a long time to go without knowing. Her words were carefully chosen, each syllable measured, revealing a careful attempt to maintain control over emotions threatening to surface. The casualness of her tone was a deceptive mask, concealing the weight of the revelation and the uncertainty of this moment. Mike nodded, understanding perfectly the carefully constructed facade. 18 years. 18 years of a life lived without her, a life he'd built on a foundation of carefully suppressed guilt and regret. He'd pictured this moment countless times, but the reality was far more complex, far more emotionally charged than any imagined scenario. The carefully crafted words he prepared seemed inadequate, utterly insufficient to capture the depth of his feelings. How could he explain the chasm that separated them, the years of silence, the weight of his unspoken regrets? Ayime, sorry, he finally stammered, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. He felt the sting of his own inadequacy, the inability to bridge the vast gulf between them with simple words. Sarah looked up, her eyes searching his. There was no anger, no judgment, just a quiet curiosity, a tentative hope. Sorry for what? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question caught him off guard. Sorry for what? For the years of silence? For the life she'd been denied? For the pain he'd unwittingly inflicted? The myriad reasons weighed heavily on him, each one a heavy stone in his chest. He hesitated, searching for the right words, the words that could possibly convey the depth of his remorse, the weight of his unspoken regrets. He knew any apology would fall short, a pale reflection of the damage done. For everything, he finally said, the words carrying the weight of his unspoken remorse. He wanted to explain, to tell her everything about the past, about the circumstances that led to their separation, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't sure how much she already knew, how much her mother had told her, and how much she was ready to hear. The truth, he realized, was a complex tapestry woven with threads of guilt, regret, and the painful weight of unspoken words. He wasn't ready to unravel that tapestry just yet. The conversation meandered, a hesitant dance around the elephant in the room, their shared history. They talked about inconsequential things, the weather, the coffee, the busy atmosphere of the cafe. It was a fragile truce, a temporary respite from the emotional storm brewing beneath the surface. Each carefully chosen word felt like a tentative step across a minefield, each silence a chasm threatening to swallow them whole. Sarah was observant, picking up on the subtle hesitations, the averted gazes, the stilted nature of their conversation. She sensed his discomfort, his reluctance to delve deeper, to confront the painful truth that lay buried beneath the surface of their awkward small talk. Yet, beneath his guarded demeanor, she sensed a flicker of something else, a fragile hope, a tentative desire for connection. It was a fragile spark, easily extinguished, but it was there, nonetheless. Mike, in turn, saw in Sarah a reflection of himself, a young woman, carrying the weight of unspoken expectations and unanswered questions. Her composure, her carefully measured words, concealed a quiet yearning for understanding. He saw in her a reflection of his own past, self-young, vulnerable, and carrying the burden of a secret that had shaped her life. As the minutes ticked by, the initial awkwardness began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative sense of connection. The conversation, though still cautious, began to flow more naturally, fueled by a shared sense of curiosity and a mutual desire to understand. They started to find common ground, sharing casual anecdotes, light-hearted observations, anything to avoid the looming shadow of their shared history. But beneath the surface of their polite conversation, the tension remained, a palpable energy that crackled between them. The coffee shop began to empty, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. The silence, no longer thick with tension, now held a different kind of weight, a sense of anticipation, of possibilities, however uncertain. As they prepared to leave, Mike finally extended his hand, his touch hesitant, uncertain. Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. It's good to finally meet you," he said, his voice low and sincere, a stark contrast to the halting awkwardness of their earlier encounter. He felt a pang of guilt, a sense of injustice for the years they'd lost, for the life Sarah had been denied. "You too," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible, her grip on his hand surprisingly firm. There was a strange sense of completion in that handshake, a symbolic bridging of the chasm that had separated them for so long. It was a beginning, a tentative step toward a future that was still uncertain but, nonetheless, filled with the promise of something new. It was a future that both of them were ready and perhaps, finally, eager to embrace. The weight of the years of separation still lingered, but beneath it lay a glimmer of hope, a potential for understanding and perhaps, just perhaps, healing. The journey ahead would be arduous, but they were, at least, beginning it together. The drive home was a blur, the familiar streets of his suburban neighborhood seeming alien and distorted. Each passing house, each neatly trimmed lawn, felt like a mocking reminder of the life he'd built, a life now teetering precariously on the edge of a chasm. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, his mind a tempestuous sea of conflicting emotions. Guilt gnawed at him, a relentless tide pulling him under. Regret, a heavy anchor, weighed down his soul. How could he have lived with this secret for 18 years? How could he have allowed a child to grow up without knowing her father? The image of Sarah's face, etched with a mixture of apprehension and tentative hope, replayed in his mind. Her eyes, so much like his own, held a quiet strength that both impressed and frightened him. He'd seen a vulnerability there too, a mirror of the insecure young man he once was, the man who'd fled responsibility, leaving a trail of broken promises in his wake. He was a different man now, older, more settled, but the echoes of that past self haunted him, whispering doubts and fears. He pulled into the driveway, the quiet hum of the engine abruptly ceasing, leaving him stranded in the suffocating silence of his own guilt. He sat for a long moment, staring at the familiar facade of his house. The warm glow of the living room lights a stark contrast to the icy landscape of his inner turmoil. His wife, Emily, would be home soon. The thought sent a fresh wave of icy dread washing over him. How could he possibly tell her? The question echoed in the suffocating silence of his car. He replayed scenarios in his head, each one ending in disaster. He saw Emily's face, contorted in pain and betrayal. He heard the sharp, catting words that would inevitably follow. He felt the crushing weight of her disappointment, her anger, her justifiable resentment. The very thought of shattering the idyllic life they'd built, the carefully constructed foundation of their marriage, filled him with a paralyzing terror. Yet, the alternative felt equally unbearable. The thought of continuing to live this lie, of keeping Sarah hidden in the shadows, was a form of self-torture. He owed it to his daughter, to Sarah, to be honest, to be present, to allow her the chance at a life that included a loving father, a life that had been denied her for so long. He got out of the car, the cool evening air doing little to soothe the burning intensity of his inner conflict. He walked towards the house, each step a physical manifestation of his internal struggle. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat accompanying the silent battle raging within him. He paused on the porch, his hand hovering over the doorknob, feeling the cold metal against his skin, a stark reminder of the cold, hard reality he was about to face. He entered the house, the familiar scent of Emily's lavender-scented candles doing little to calm his racing thoughts. He could hear the faint sounds of her humming from the kitchen, a gentle melody that was strangely discordant with the storm raging inside him. He found her there, surrounded by the cozy chaos of meal preparation, her back turned, humming softly as she chopped vegetables. The sight of her, so serene and unaware of the impending storm, intensified the conflict within him. How could he shatter this peace? How could he break her heart with the devastating truth? He watched her for a long moment, studying her every movement, each subtle gesture. He saw the fine lines around her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile, the way her hair fell softly around her shoulders. He loved her fiercely, a love so deep and profound that the thought of betraying it sent waves of nausea through him. But he also loved Sarah, a love he'd only just discovered, a love that was both unexpected and fiercely powerful. He had to tell her. He knew that deep down. The delay only prolonged the inevitable pain and increased the depth of the transgression. But how? And when? And most importantly, how could he possibly navigate the emotional wreckage that would inevitably follow? The weight of his decision pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He felt the cold sweat beading on his forehead, the trembling in his hands a testament to the internal turmoil that consumed him. He tried to picture his life with this new reality Sarah woven into their lives. He envisioned family dinners filled with laughter and shared stories. He imagined weekends spent together, creating new memories. But then the images shifted, replaced by images of conflict and discord, of Emily's heartbroken face, the chilling possibility of the disintegration of his family. He felt trapped, caught between two worlds, two loves, each one equally important. He could have told her immediately after he met Sarah. He could have been transparent, honest, a man of integrity. But instead he'd chosen silence, a cowardly retreat into the shadows of deception. And this had left him at this point, struggling in the mire of self-inflicted remorse. He wanted to undo his past actions, to rewind time and make different choices, but he knew it was impossible. He could only move forward, facing the consequences of his actions with the best grace he could muster. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the kitchen counter, a picture of him and Emily on their wedding day, their faces radiating happiness and love. The memory of that day, the promise of forever, the vows they'd exchanged, felt both distant and agonizingly close. The photograph served as a constant reminder of the life he'd carefully constructed, a life that was now teetering on the brink of collapse. He cleared his throat, the sound loud and abrupt in the quiet kitchen. Emily turned, her face breaking into a smile. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice laced with concern. The concern, the natural worry about his demeanor, made his task even harder, more painful. He opened his mouth to speak, to spill the secrets that had been weighing him down for 18 years, but the words caught in his throat. The weight of his confession felt too immense, too heavy to bear. He was drowning in his internal struggle, and he couldn't find a lifeline. The simple act of confessing felt like scaling a near-impossible mountain. Thus, he needed time, a moment to gather the courage to face the storm he had created. He needed a way to soften the blow, to prepare her, somehow, for the seismic shift that was about to occur in their lives. The unexpected revelation was no longer just a secret to keep, but a monstrous force threatening to destroy everything he held dear. The chipped paint on the windowsill was the same shade of faded blue as her bedroom walls, a color she'd always found comforting, a quiet, unwavering constant in her life. It was a life she'd carefully constructed, a life of predictable routines and quiet solitude. Now, everything felt unsteady, the familiar ground beneath her feet shifting and crumbling. The news of her father, a man she'd never known, a man who'd existed only as a vague, almost mythical figure in her imagination, had shattered the carefully constructed walls of her predictable existence. She traced the pattern of the chipped paint with a fingertip, her mind adrift in a sea of confusion. 18 years. 18 years she'd lived without him, building her life around the absence of a father, accepting that void as a fundamental part of her identity. And now, suddenly, he was there, a tangible presence in her life, a man whose DNA intertwined with hers, whose genes were woven into the very fabric of her being. The DNA test, a whim, a desperate attempt to uncover a mystery she hadn't known she possessed, had upended everything. It wasn't just the discovery of a father, but the complicated layers of family history that were now unveiled, creating more questions than it answered. She felt a strange detachment from the situation, a clinical observation of her own upheaval. It was as if she were an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, analyzing the emotions, the societal implications, instead of experiencing them directly. She picked up a half-finished sketch, a charcoal rendering of the old oak tree that stood sentinel in her backyard, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. The lines were precise, the shading meticulous, reflecting the methodical approach she applied to everything in her life, a testament to her orderly personality. It was a way of finding order in the chaos, a method of keeping things predictable in a world that had, until recently, been remarkably stable and calm. But now, the chaos threatened to overwhelm her. The image of Mike, his face blurred and unclear from the single grainy photograph she'd managed to find online, played in her mind. He looked tired, she thought, carrying the weight of the years, the responsibility of a life lived perhaps with regrets and uncertainties, a life parallel to her own. She wasn't sure what to expect from this newfound connection, this unexpected link to a man she'd never known. She wondered if they shared similar traits, similar quirks of personality, similar mannerisms. Did he have a quick smile? Did he hold his coffee cup a certain way? Would they discover these shared characteristics, these unspoken links, and suddenly understand each other with ease? Or would it be a struggle? The thought of meeting him, of sitting across from him, of engaging in a real, tangible conversation with a man who held a piece of her past, sent shivers down her spine. It was a mixture of excitement and trepidation, a cocktail of anticipation and fear that left her heart racing. Would they connect? Would he understand? Would he be everything she'd imagined, or something altogether different? Or nothing at all, a hollow shell of her expectations? Would the anticipation and the reality ever meet? She glanced at the clock, the relentless ticking a counterpoint to the stillness of the room. She had arranged to meet him tomorrow, a neutral setting, a coffee shop on the edge of town. The thought of it was both exciting and terrifying. She could almost feel the weight of his eyes on her, probing, searching for a connection she wasn't sure existed. Sarah had always been a solitary soul, content in her own company, finding solace in the quiet predictability of her daily routine. She'd excelled at school, maintaining a balance between her academic pursuits and her solitary hobbies. Her friends were few, but close. And, of course, she had her mother, her lifelong confidant, the anchor in her life. Yet this meeting promised to upset the balance of that careful equilibrium. The carefully constructed world she had built, one based on a life she knew, felt as if it was shifting beneath her feet. This newfound family dynamic was a terrifying unknown. She thought back to the conversation with her mother, the careful way her mother had broken the news, the measured tone, the supportive words offering both encouragement and caution. Her mother had warned her that this discovery might be painful, complex, even traumatic, leaving her daughter uncertain and hesitant. But there was also a cautious excitement in her mother's voice, a sense of long-awaited resolution, the closing of a chapter that had gone unwritten. The possibility that this could shatter her life, this could pull apart the careful threads she'd woven together over the years, was both horrifying and yet also thrillingly unknown. The thought of potentially uncovering a new chapter, a new familial identity, had a strange, exciting appeal, an intriguing challenge to her meticulous, orderly life. The carefully planned patterns of her days felt threatening. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the old oak tree. Its sturdy presence, its unwavering stance against the changing seasons, provided a small comfort. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the enduring strength of nature, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, life finds a way to persist, to grow. Perhaps, she thought, this new chapter in her life, this unexpected revelation of a father she'd never known, would be the same. It would be challenging, disruptive, and unsettling, but ultimately it might be a source of strength and growth. It was just too early to see it, Too early to predict the outcome of this momentous event in her life. Maybe, just maybe, it would be something good. Something that would not only change her life, but enrich it. Only time would tell. But for the first time in her life, the future felt less predictable, less secure, and yet strangely and incredibly exciting. The old, familiar comfort was gone, replaced by an unknown territory she was almost afraid to enter, yet eager to explore.